My beloved child, stop scrolling for a moment. Do not rush past these words, because what you are about to hear was not placed before you by accident. Somewhere between the silence of your ordinary day and the ache you have carried quietly in your heart, a hidden truth has been waiting for the right moment to surface. And that moment is closer than you think. I want you to listen carefully, because this is not the kind of message you hear with your ears alone. You will feel certain words before you understand them. You may remember a conversation you thought was insignificant. You may suddenly picture a face, a room, a particular evening, or a question that seemed innocent at the time. And when that memory returns, do not dismiss it, because there was a question, a simple question, a child's question. It sounded harmless, almost too innocent to matter, but the moment those little words were spoken, something your soulmate had carefully buried for years began to crack open. You did not see it happen, you were not supposed to, at least, not then. You saw only the surface. You saw a moment that passed quickly. You saw an adult smile, perhaps laugh nervously, perhaps change the subject. You may have thought nothing of it. You may have been somewhere else entirely when it happened, but heaven saw everything, and I have brought you here because what looked like an ordinary question carried the weight of a truth that had been hidden behind years of silence. Pause here, take a breath, because I am not speaking to frighten you. I am speaking because there are secrets that are not revealed to destroy love. Some secrets are revealed because love has finally become strong enough to survive the truth. For years, your soulmate has carried something inside their heart that they did not know how to explain to you. Not because you were unworthy of knowing. Not because your love meant nothing. And not necessarily because the secret was what your fear may immediately imagine. There is something deeper here, something connected to a wound, something connected to a choice they made long before they understood what that choice would cost them. And the strange part is this: they may have convinced themselves that hiding it was an act of protection. They may have told themselves, again and again, if I tell them, everything will change. So they stayed silent. Then another day came, and another, until years passed. But buried truth does not disappear merely because time moves forward. It waits, it becomes quieter, it hides beneath routines, smiles, responsibilities, conversations, and ordinary evenings, and sometimes, all it takes is the innocent voice of a child to touch the exact place where that secret has been sleeping. That is what happened. The child did not know, there was no plan, there was no intention to expose anything. There was simply curiosity. A child's mind noticed something adults had learned to overlook, and then came the question. Your soulmate froze, not dramatically, not in a way everyone could see. It was smaller than that, a pause, a change in the eyes, a breath that came slightly too late, a smile that did not reach the heart. Perhaps the child asked again because the first answer did not make sense. And that second question was the moment the atmosphere changed, because sometimes innocence sees what fear has trained adults to hide. Sometimes a child can walk directly toward a truth that grown people have spent years walking around. And my beloved child, this is where I need you to understand something. You have probably questioned yourself before. You may have wondered why certain moments in your relationship felt strangely incomplete, why there were times when your soulmate seemed emotionally present, yet somehow far away, why they could look directly into your eyes and still appear as though part of them was somewhere you could not reach. You may have blamed yourself. You may have thought, maybe I am asking for too much. Maybe you told yourself they were simply tired, maybe they were stressed, maybe they were afraid of commitment, maybe they had changed, maybe you had changed. You created explanations because the truth was not available to you, and yet there were moments when your spirit whispered, there is something else. You pushed that feeling away, you tried to be reasonable, you tried to trust, you tried not to become suspicious, and perhaps that was wise, because suspicion without truth can become a prison, but intuition is different. There is a difference between inventing a fear and noticing a pattern. There is a difference between accusing someone and sensing that a conversation remains unfinished. There is a difference between paranoia and the quiet recognition that something in a story does not completely fit. You felt the unfinished sentence. You simply did not know what words belonged at the end of it. Until now, the child's question touched that unfinished sentence. And suddenly, your soulmate was standing face to face with a memory they had spent years trying not to revisit, a memory connected to you, a memory connected to the person they became before they met you, a memory that explains more than you realize, because there is something your soulmate has been afraid you would discover about them. And listen carefully to this next part. They are not only afraid that you will know what happened. They are afraid you will change the way you see them. After you know why it happened, that distinction matters, because it tells us this secret is not simply about an event, it is about shame, it is about regret, it is about a decision they have replayed in their mind more times than you could possibly know. There was a moment in their past when they believed they had no choice. Maybe they chose silence, maybe they walked away, maybe they allowed someone else to believe something that was not completely true, maybe they protected a person who did not deserve their protection, maybe they sacrificed something precious because they believed doing so would prevent greater pain, and then life moved forward, but their heart did not completely move with it. For years, they carried the consequences alone. You wondered why they sometimes became unusually quiet when certain subjects appeared. You wondered why particular places made them distant. You wondered why they avoided one name. Why they changed the subject. Why certain memories seemed to have a locked door around them. And perhaps you never pushed. Perhaps some part of you knew that if you pushed too hard, they would retreat even farther. So you waited, you loved, you hoped, and heaven watched. My child, there are moments when silence is not emptiness. Silence can be a room full of words that someone is terrified to speak. Your soulmate has been living inside such a room. And the child's question opened. The door, not completely, not yet, but enough for light to enter. That is why this moment matters. You might think the secret itself is the revelation. It is not. The deeper revelation is why they hid it from you. Because once you understand the reason, you will see the entire relationship through a different lens. You will remember conversations differently. You will understand certain reactions. You will recognize why their love sometimes came with hesitation, why affection could suddenly become distance, why they could be incredibly protective of you one day and strangely withdrawn the next. They were fighting two worlds inside themselves. The person you know, and the person they were afraid. You would discover, for a long time, they believed those two people could never coexist. They thought if you saw the whole story, you would stop loving the person standing in front of you. So they gave you pieces. They gave you the version of themselves they thought you could safely hold, and they buried the rest. But secrets have a strange way of becoming heavier when love becomes deeper. At first, hiding something may feel like relief, then it becomes a habit, then a burden, then a wall, and eventually, the person who built the wall becomes trapped behind it. That is where your soulmate has been, behind a wall they built themselves. And now, something has begun to shake it, not an enemy, not a stranger, not some dramatic force, a child, a tiny voice, a question asked without calculation, and when your soulmate heard those words, something inside them remembered. Not merely what happened, but what they lost. That is the part they never told you. There is a loss connected to this secret, something they have carried privately, something they once believed they would have to mourn forever. And here is where the story becomes even more unexpected, because the person or circumstance connected to that loss may not be as far away from your present life as you think. You may already know more about it than you realize. You may have encountered a clue and never recognized its meaning. You may have heard a sentence years ago that seemed strange. You may have noticed an object your soulmate kept hidden, a photograph, a letter, a name, a place, a date, something ordinary that carried extraordinary meaning for them. You saw it, but you did not know what you were looking at, and perhaps that is why this message found you now. Heaven reveals it by connecting memories that were never connected before, one detail, then another, until suddenly the entire picture begins to form. And when it does, you may realize something that changes the question you have been asking. You have been asking, what did they hide from me? But the deeper question is, what were they trying to protect me from? That is where the real revelation begins, because your soulmate may not have been protecting themselves from your judgment. They may have been protecting you from a burden they believed belonged to them alone. They may have thought, I already survived this. Why should the person I love have to carry it too? That sounds noble, but sometimes love becomes unhealthy when it decides for another person what they are allowed to know. Sometimes protecting someone from pain also prevents them from understanding the person they love. Your soulmate may finally be realizing that, and that realization began with a child's question. Imagine the scene, a quiet moment, nothing dramatic, life happening around them. A child speaking with the fearless honesty only innocence can possess. The question lands, your soulmate smiles, then pauses, their eyes move away, and for one brief second, the past becomes more real than the present. They remember the moment they made the choice. They remember who was there. They remember what they promised. They remember what they never said. And most importantly, they remember you. Because somewhere along the way, the secret stopped being only about their past. It became about your future. They started wondering how long they could continue hiding it. They wondered what would happen if you discovered it from someone else. They wondered whether you would feel betrayed, whether you would believe their love had been a lie, whether you would walk away, and perhaps the most painful thought of all entered their mind: what if they deserved the truth from the beginning? That question has been haunting them. You may not have heard it, but they have, in the quiet hours, in moments when they cannot sleep, in those strange pauses when you ask them, "Are you okay?" And they answer, "Yes," even though something inside them is collapsing. You sensed it. You simply did not know its name. Now listen to me carefully. Do not rush to judgment. Do not turn this revelation into an accusation before the whole story has been revealed. Because what you are hearing is only the edge of the veil. There is more, much more. The child's question did not expose everything. It exposed the first crack. And behind that crack is a truth your soulmate has spent years trying to bury beneath the life they built with you. There is a reason they chose silence. There is a reason they kept one particular memory separate from everything else. There is a reason they became emotional around certain subjects, and there is a reason they have never told you what really happened on that day. But the reason is not what you think. That is why I am asking you to stay with this message. Because the next revelation will force you to reconsider the meaning of one moment you may have forgotten completely, a moment that seemed ordinary, a moment you may have dismissed, a moment when your soulmate looked at you differently. You thought they were simply emotional. You thought they were tired. You thought they were remembering something unrelated. But they were looking at the one person they never expected to become connected to the secret they had carried for years, you. And now the child has unknowingly brought that secret back to the surface. Your soulmate has a decision to make: continue protecting the silence, or finally tell you the truth. But before they can speak, there is one more piece of the story that must be understood. Because the secret did not begin with the child. It began long before you met, and the person your soulmate was trying to protect all those years ago may be connected to a name you have heard before, a name you never thought mattered, a name that is about to change everything. And my beloved child, that is where the veil begins to lift. My beloved child, the name is closer than you think. You may have heard it before. You may have seen it written somewhere. You may even have met the person connected to it without realizing that you were standing near a chapter of your soulmate's life they had spent years trying to keep closed. And this is where I need you to slow down. Because the truth is not arriving all at once. It is unfolding, piece by piece, memory by memory, like a locked room inside the heart whose door has finally begun to open. The child asked a question, your soulmate answered, but the answer was not the truth. It was the answer they had practiced for years. The safe answer, the simple answer. The answer that would end the conversation before anyone could ask another question. But the child did not move on. Children do not always understand why adults become uncomfortable. they simply notice when something does not make sense. So the child looked again, and asked something else. That second question was the one your soulmate could not easily escape. Because it touched the exact detail they had buried, the room became quiet. Your soulmate looked down, and for one brief moment, they were no longer the person you know today. They were the younger version of themselves, standing in another place, living another life, carrying another fear. And suddenly, they remembered the promise they made years ago, the promise that became the foundation of the secret. They had promised someone that they would never tell, not you, not their family, not anyone, and at the time, they believed keeping that promise was the right thing to do. They believed silence was loyalty. They believed secrecy was protection. They believed that if they carried the burden themselves, nobody else would have to suffer. But there is something they did not understand then. A promise made from fear can become a chain, and your soulmate has been wearing that chain for years. You have seen the evidence without knowing what it meant. The moments when they suddenly became distant, the occasions when they seemed overwhelmed by memories that had no obvious connection to the present, the strange sadness that appeared in their eyes when they watched certain people, the way they sometimes held you more tightly than necessary, as though some invisible part of them was terrified of losing you. You may have thought it was simply affection, perhaps it was, but there was something beneath it. Fear, not fear of you, fear of losing what they had finally found, because after years of believing they had already lost something precious, they eventually met you, and you changed the meaning of their past. That is what they never expected. Before you, the secret belonged to a chapter they believed was finished. After you, that chapter began asking questions again, because loving you made them wonder whether they could finally become honest, and that terrified them. You see, my child, sometimes the person who loves you most deeply is not the person who finds honesty easiest. Sometimes love reveals every place inside a person that still needs healing. Your soulmate discovered that loving you meant eventually confronting themselves. They could no longer hide behind the person they used to be. They could no longer pretend the past had no power. They could no longer tell themselves that silence was harmless, because every time you trusted them, the secret became heavier. Every time you looked at them with love, they felt the weight of what they had never told you. And every time you said, "I trust you," something inside them whispered, "But there is still something you do not know." That whisper became unbearable, yet they still remained silent, until the child asked that innocent question, and suddenly, the past was standing in the present. Your soulmate remembered the day it all began. It was not a glamorous day. There was no dramatic music, no obvious sign from heaven. It was ordinary, almost painfully ordinary. That is often how life-changing moments arrive. A phone call, a doorway, a conversation, a decision made in a hurry. A person standing there with tears in their eyes, and your soulmate being forced to choose. They were young. They did not understand how permanent the decision would become. Someone needed help. Someone was afraid. Someone asked them to keep something hidden, and your soulmate said yes. That yes changed everything. For years, they believed that if they told anyone what happened, they would betray the person who had trusted them. So they protected the secret, even when it hurt. Even when it isolated them, even when it began to interfere with their ability to fully open their heart, and then you came into their life. You were not supposed to be part of that old story. At least, that is what they believed, but life has a strange way of bringing unfinished stories back to the people who are finally strong enough to understand them. You did not arrive to punish them for their past. You arrived at a time when they could no longer remain the same person. That is why your connection felt different. That is why there may have been an immediate familiarity between you. That strange sensation of recognition. The feeling that you had known them longer than you actually had, the comfort, the intensity, the moments of deep closeness followed by inexplicable distance. It was not because everything was perfect, it was because your presence touched something unfinished inside them. You became a mirror, and mirrors do not allow us